The FDA has broad discretion to use flexible decision-making when considering new drug applications, and it routinely must make difficult decisions before convincing evidence of safety and efficacy has been generated for products designed to treat serious illnesses. But the agency doesn't consider a drug's likely financial toxicity when weighing potential benefits and burdens. I'm Stephen Morrissey, managing editor of the New England Journal of Medicine, and I'm talking with Peter Ubel, a professor of business, public policy, and medicine at Duke University. Dr. Ubel has co-authored a perspective article about out-of-pocket costs for rapidly approved drugs. Dr. Ubel, what factors does the FDA typically consider when deciding whether to approve a new drug, either under its standard approval track or under fast track or accelerated approval pathways?
Key is for the FDA to consider the safety and efficacy of the drug. It needs to help patients without causing so many medical side effects that it's not a good balance of risks and benefits. So, safety and efficacy. It does not consider economics at all. In fact, it's forbidden from considering economics, unlike some other countries where part of the approval process also involves looking at the economics. Safety and efficacy. See, now, when it comes to rapidly approved drugs, there might be a different threshold for efficacy that they look at. A traditional drug is approved after a big trial, maybe we call it a phase 3 trial, shows that the drug reduces heart attacks or increases survival rates for people with cancer, etc. Under accelerated approval mechanisms, the FDA has the ability to take, say, a surrogate measure of drug. It shrinks the tumor, but we don't know yet whether people live longer. But because those patients are in such desperate need of treatment for that particular tumor, we're going to give it this accelerated approval.
So you say that looking at the economic issues is forbidden. What actually prevents the FDA from considering a drug's financial toxicity?
I am not a lawyer, but I think it's not a power that they have. They've not been asked to do that. They've not been given the regulatory authority to make economic judgments. Now, Medicare can decide whether to cover something, and we're starting to see some negotiation of drug pricing within Medicare. And certainly, when a drug is approved, private insurance companies can decide whether they want to pay for the drug. But those decisions are independent of the FDA deciding whether a drug is safe and effective.
And given that current situation, what's known about how much patients end up spending out of pocket for these new rapidly approved drugs?
We know that most rapidly approved drugs are coming to market at an annual cost of $100,000, $200,000, maybe $300,000. There's exceptions on either end. We know that many people have insurance plans that require them to pay 10 to 20% out of pocket for medications, at least until they reach some out of pocket maximum for the year. So imagine it's a $200,000 drug and you pay just 10% of the price. You're on the hook for $20,000 this year.
You say in your perspective article that several policy changes could reduce the chances that patients are going to see financial harm because of these co-payments. The first change you describe relates to drug labeling and patient information. What would a policy like that look like?
I'll start off by saying I don't have great confidence in any of these policies on their own to do the work. And this one in particular, I think, will have just an effect on the margins. If I am a patient and I'm in desperate need of a medication, and I see that the FDA has approved the medicine, it's really logical for me to assume that that means the medicine has been shown to help people like me. We write about a drug, I hope I don't mispronounce its name, Relivrio, which was approved for treatment of amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, ALS, progressive, often fatal neurologic disorder with no effective treatments. And they did not have evidence that it prolonged survival in those patients. But many people seeing that it was FDA approved may have come to that assumption. And so we think, at a minimum, the FDA should make it very clear on the label and in what they do in watching the advertisements that come out to these drugs to emphasize that this is still unproven, that we got it to market quickly, but it hasn't yet been shown to extend your life. And then a patient or a family that see enormous medical bills coming their way are better informed about whether it's worth going into debt to pay for an unproven medicine.
And then a second policy possibility, you write that the federal government could take steps to address the prices of new drugs. So what types of price controls could policymakers consider in these cases?
This is something we have not traditionally done in this country. In the United Kingdom, before the national government decides to pay for a new medicine, They look for evidence of its cost effectiveness. How many quality adjusted years of life does this drug bring at how many pounds do you have to spend to get that kind of benefit? We don't do that in the United States, but we could certainly have Medicare set a threshold and say they want to see a certain amount of cost effectiveness for a drug for Medicare to pay for it. And that really means the drug company would have to find a price that meant the drug would be good value at that price. And if Medicare decided to do that, there's a decent chance that private payers would follow suit.
And then a third approach that you talk about would involve implementing limits on out-of-pocket costs for drugs whose benefits haven't been clearly demonstrated. So who would have the authority to establish such limits and enforce them?
It might be that Congress needs to step up and give somebody the authority to do that because we don't currently have a mechanism for that. Currently, Medicare does not allow drug companies to help people pay the copays on their medications. The idea being that that distorts the market, that the drug company can charge a really high price and know that patients can still afford it because their out of pocket costs will be relieved. We can debate whether that's good policy or not. But in the case of rapidly approved drugs, where patients will be bearing these out of pocket burdens without knowing that they're going to get a commensurate medical benefit, it might be time to revisit this limit that Medicare sets and perhaps allow Medicare recipients to get copay relief or assistance for drugs that have received accelerated approval. And while politics is always hard to predict, there is, I think, interest on both sides of the aisle to try to help people afford their medications. And many people, Republicans and Democrats and independent voters, are burdened by high price of drugs and their out-of-pocket expenses. And so I think there should be interest, hopefully, for Congress to try to address that.
Thank you, Dr. Ubel.